The dust cloud rising behind the fleeing horse caught Mason O'Brien's attention first, followed by the broken sound of sobbing that carried across the prairie wind like a wounded bird's cry. Mason had been riding back to Hamilton, Montana, after checking his cattle on the northern range when he spotted the rider heading east at a reckless pace. The afternoon sun of July 1883 beat down mercilessly, and whoever was on that horse seemed determined to leave civilization behind without care for the dangerous terrain ahead. As he drew closer, he could make out long dark hair streaming behind a woman's frame, and the way her shoulders shook told him she was crying hard enough to blind her to the hazards of the badlands stretching before her. He urged his bay gelding into a gallop, closing the distance between them. The woman's horse, a painted mare with wild eyes, was already showing signs of exhaustion. Mason knew these lands better than most, having worked them for the past 5 years since settling in Montana territory at 20 years old. He was 25 now, hardened by the elements but not by spirit, and something about the desperate flight of this woman stirred a protective instinct he had not felt in years. "Madam," he called out, but his voice was lost to the wind and her grief. He pushed his horse harder, finally drawing alongside her. Without thinking, he reached out and grabbed the painted mare's bridle, pulling both horses to a halt. The woman's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face showing surprise and fear in equal measure. "Let go," she cried, trying to pull the reins free. "Just let me go." "Not until you tell me why you are trying to kill yourself and that horse," Mason said firmly, keeping his grip steady. "There is nothing but broken ground and rattlesnakes out that way, and your mare is half dead already." The woman stared at him with eyes the color of storm clouds, gray and turbulent. Tears still streamed down her cheeks, cutting paths through the dust on her face. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with features that would have been beautiful if not twisted by anguish. Her dress was fine, too fine for hard riding and already torn at the hem. "What does it matter?" she said, her voice breaking. "There is nothing left for me back there. Nothing." Mason noticed the bruise forming on her left cheek, partially hidden by her hair. His jaw tightened. "Did someone hurt you?" She looked away, fresh tears spilling. "Please, just let me go. This is none of your concern." "I am making it my concern," Mason said, more gently now. He released her bridle but kept his horse positioned to block her path. "My name is Mason O'Brien. I have a ranch about 3 miles south of Hamilton. You can tell me what happened, or you can sit here in silence, but I am not letting you ride off to your death." The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. Her shoulders slumped and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. Mason dismounted quickly, then reached up to help her down. She did not resist, sliding from the saddle into his steadying arms. The moment her feet touched ground, her knees buckled and he caught her, supporting her weight as she cried against his chest. "Easy now," he murmured, the way he might gentle a spooked horse. "You are safe. Whatever it is, you are safe right now." They stood like that for several minutes, the only sounds her weeping and the wind whistling through the prairie grass. Mason's horse and her mare stood nearby, grateful for the rest. Finally, her sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. She pulled back, wiping at her face with trembling hands. "I am sorry," she whispered. "I do not even know you." "Sometimes strangers are easier to talk to," Mason said. "What is your name?" She hesitated, then said, Jessica Harper." "Well, Miss Harper, why do not we get you and these horses some water, and then you can decide what you want to tell me." He gestured toward a small creek he knew ran about half a mile to the south. "There is shade there too. This sun is not helping anything." Jessica nodded mutely, too exhausted to argue. Mason helped her back onto her mare, keeping the painted's reins in his hand as he mounted his own horse. They rode slowly toward the creek, and he was glad to see her mare perk up at the scent of water. At the creek bank, beneath a stand of cottonwood trees, Mason helped Jessica down again and led both horses to drink. He pulled a canteen from his saddle and offered it to her. She drank deeply, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, she sank onto a fallen log, staring at the creek with hollow eyes. Mason sat nearby, giving her space but staying close enough that she would know he was not abandoning her. He rolled a cigarette but did not light it, just turned it between his fingers as he waited. "I was supposed to get married today," Jessica finally said, her voice flat. "To Charles Wickham. He owns the Mercantile in Hamilton and half the buildings on Main Street. My father arranged it, said it was a good match, that I would be taken care of." Mason said nothing, sensing there was more. "Charles is 43 years old," Jessica continued. "I am 22. I did not love him, but I thought I could learn to. I thought I could make a good life, be a good wife." She laughed bitterly. "I was so stupid." "What happened?" "This morning, before the ceremony, I went to his house to bring him a gift, a pocket watch that had belonged to my grandfather. I wanted to start things right, you know, show him I was trying." Her hands clenched in her lap. "I found him in his bedroom with another woman, not just any woman. My cousin, Sarah. They were laughing together, and he was telling her that marrying me was just business, that I was too young and too dull to really interest him, but my father's land adjoined his properties, and the marriage would make the acquisition easy." Mason felt anger kindle in his chest. "What did you do?" I confronted them. "Charles hit me." She touched the bruise on her cheek. "He told me to get out, that if I said anything to anyone he would ruin my father. He has debts, you see. Charles holds the notes. He said he would call them all due immediately, that my father would lose everything. So you ran." "I could not go through with it," Jessica said, tears starting again. "I could not stand there in front of the whole town and marry him, knowing what he is, what he thinks of me. But I cannot go back home either. My father will be ruined because of me. Everyone will talk. I have destroyed everything." Mason was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You did not destroy anything. Charles Wickham is the villain here, and your father should have protected you better than to sell you off to a man like that." "You do not understand," Jessica said desperately. "In Hamilton, Charles Wickham is respected. He is on the town council. People trust him. No one will believe me over him. And my father needs this marriage. Without it, we will lose our farm. My mother is sick. She needs medicine care. If we lose the farm, I do not know what will happen to her." "There are always choices," Mason said. "They might not be easy ones, but there are always choices." "Not for me," Jessica whispered. "Women do not have choices, not real ones." Mason stood and walked to the creek's edge, watching the water flow over smooth stones. He had known plenty of men like Charles Wickham in his years, men who used their money and position to control others. It made his blood boil. "How much does your father owe?" he asked. Jessica looked up surprised. "What? The debts? How much?" "I do not know exactly. Several $1,000s, I think." "Why?" Mason turned back to her. "Because I have money, not an endless supply, but enough. I have been careful, saved most of what I have made these past 5 years. My ranch is small but profitable. I could pay off your father's debts." Jessica stood quickly. "I cannot accept that. I do not even know you. Why would you do such a thing?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Mason said simply. "And because I am not going to let you ride off into the Badlands to die because some coward hit you and threatened your family. But I could never repay you." Mason was quiet for a moment, an idea forming. It was crazy, possibly the craziest thing he had ever considered, but something about Jessica Harper made him want to help her, made him want to protect her from men like Charles Wickham. "You could marry me instead," he said. The words hung in the air between them. Jessica stared at him as if he had lost his mind, which perhaps he had. "What?" she finally managed. "Think about it," Mason said, warming to the idea even as he spoke it aloud. "You need a way out of this marriage without destroying your family. I can provide that. We marry, I pay your father's debts, and Charles Wickham loses his leverage. You would have a home at my ranch. It is not fancy, but it is comfortable and the land is good. You are suggesting we marry, right now. We have known each other less than an hour." "I know it sounds insane," Mason admitted, "but consider your alternatives. You go back to Hamilton and marry Wickham, knowing he will never respect you or be faithful. You refuse and your family is ruined. Or you keep riding east until exhaustion or the elements or bad luck catches up with you." He took a step closer. "Or you take a chance on a stranger who is at least being honest with you about his intentions." "What are your intentions?" Jessica asked warily. "Why would you want to marry me?" "I am not going to pretend I am being purely noble," Mason said. "Truth is, I have been thinking for a while now that I need a wife. The ranch is growing and there is more work than I can handle alone. I could use a partner. And maybe someday, if we are lucky, we could build something real together. But I would not force anything on you. You would have your own room, your own space. We would be partners first, and anything more would only happen if you wanted it." Jessica sat back down on the log, her mind clearly racing. "This is madness." "Yes," Mason agreed, "but it is a chance, a choice, your choice." She looked up at him, really studied him for the first time. He was tall and lean, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that needed cutting. His eyes were a warm brown, honest and direct. His face was handsome in a rugged way, with strong features and smile lines around his eyes. He wore simple clothes, a work shirt and sturdy pants and worn boots, but they were clean and well-maintained. Everything about him spoke of a man who worked hard and took care of what was his. "You would really do this?" she asked quietly. "Pay my father's debts, marry me without really knowing me?" "I would," Mason said. "I cannot explain it exactly, but when I saw you riding away in tears, something in me knew I could not just let you go. Maybe it is fate, maybe it is just the right moment, but yes, I would do this." Jessica was silent for a long time, weighing her options. Finally, she said, "If I agree, and I am not saying I am, but if I did, what would you expect from me, honestly? Help with the ranch when you are able, someone to talk to at the end of the day. Eventually, maybe a family if we find that we suit each other, but mostly just partnership. I do not want a servant or a decoration, Miss Harper. I want someone who will build a life with me. And if we find we cannot stand each other, then we will deal with that when and if it happens," Mason said. "But I am a patient man, and I would rather take a chance on happiness than settle for loneliness." Jessica stood again, pacing a few steps along the creek bank. Everything she had known, everything she had planned for her life, had been shattered that morning. The idea of going back to Hamilton, of facing the gossip and the shame and her father's disappointment, filled her with dread. But marrying a complete stranger, yet when she looked at Mason, she did not see cruelty or calculation in his eyes. She saw sincerity. And he was right about one thing, at least he was being honest with her. That was more than Charles Wickham had ever been. "Where would we marry?" she asked. "Everyone in Hamilton knows I was supposed to marry Charles today." "There is a circuit preacher who comes through the settlements," Mason said. "He was in Hamilton last week, which means he is probably in Deer Lodge by now, or maybe already heading to one of the mining camps. We could ride to Deer Lodge. It is about 40 miles west. That would take days. 2 days if we push it, maybe 3 if we take our time. We can stay at homesteads along the way. I know some of the families. They will put us up for the night." Jessica wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the summer heat. My parents will be frantic. They will think something terrible happened to me. We can send word once we are married, Mason said. Let them know you are safe and that the debts will be handled. After that, it will be up to you how much you want to see them. I would want to see them, Jessica said quickly. My mother especially. She is not well and I worry about her. Then we will make sure you can see her whenever you need to, Mason promised. The ranch is only a few miles from your father's farm. It would not be difficult. Jessica took a deep breath, then another. She thought about Charles Wickham's cold eyes and casual cruelty. She thought about her father's desperation and her mother's illness. She thought about the emptiness of the prairie she had been riding toward and the emptiness of the life that awaited her back in Hamilton. Then she looked at Mason O'Brien, this stranger who had turned her horse around and offered her something she had not expected. A choice. "All right," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will marry you." Mason felt relief and something else, something he could not quite name, wash over him. He held out his hand. "Partners?" Jessica looked at his extended hand, calloused and strong, honest work written in every line. She reached out and took it. "Partners." They shook on it, and in that moment, both their lives changed forever. They rode west as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the mountains. Mason set a steady but not punishing pace, conscious of Jessica's mare's exhaustion and the emotional toll the day had taken on his unexpected companion. Jessica rode mostly in silence, occasionally stealing glances at the man who was now, incredibly, her fiancé. As the miles passed, Mason told her about his ranch. "It is not much yet," he said. "About 200 acres, maybe 60 head of cattle. I have a decent cabin, 2 rooms with a loft. There is a barn and a chicken coop, and I have been working on a root cellar. The land has good water, 2 springs that never run dry, and the grazing is excellent." "Do you run it alone?" Jessica asked. "Mostly. I have a hand named Thomas who helps during branding and roundup, but day to day it is just me. I manage well enough, but there is always more work than hours in the day." "I can work," Jessica said. "I grew up on a farm. I know how to garden, how to preserve food, how to handle chickens and milk cows. I can sew and cook and manage a household." "That is good to know," Mason said with a slight smile. "Though I will warn you, my cooking is nothing special. I can keep from starving, but that is about the extent of my skills in the kitchen." Despite everything, Jessica found herself smiling slightly. "Then I suppose I will have something to contribute right away." They stopped for the night at the homestead of a family Mason knew, the Johnsons. Frank and Martha Johnson had 3 young children and a small but tidy claim about 20 miles west of Hamilton. Martha was a round, cheerful woman who took one look at Jessica's tear-stained face and bruised cheek and immediately ushered her inside, clucking like a worried hen. Frank, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, helped Mason settle the horses. "Trouble?" he asked quietly. "Some," Mason admitted. "The lady was in a bad situation in Hamilton. I am helping her out of it." Frank nodded slowly. "Heard some things about Hamilton lately, about Charles Wickham getting himself engaged to a young woman. That her. It was supposed to be," Mason said. "It is not going to be now. Wickham will not take that well. Man like that, he likes getting his way." "He will have to learn to live with disappointment," Mason said firmly. Frank studied him for a moment, then said, "You are taking her on yourself. We are getting married in Deer Lodge." Frank's eyebrows rose, but he did not question it. Instead, he clapped Mason on the shoulder. "Then congratulations are in order. Martha will be tickled. She loves a wedding." Inside, Martha had already settled Jessica at the table with hot coffee and fresh bread. The children, 2 boys and a girl ranging from about 4 to 8 years old, watched Jessica with wide, curious eyes until their mother shooed them off to play. "Now then," Martha said, sitting down across from Jessica. "Mason is a good man, one of the best I know. If he is helping you, you can trust him." Jessica felt tears threaten again. "I know this must seem strange." "Strange times call for strange solutions," Martha said pragmatically. "I am not going to pry into your business. I am just going to make sure you have a decent meal and a safe place to sleep tonight. The rest will sort itself out." That night, Jessica slept in the loft with the Johnson children while Mason bedded down in the barn. Despite her exhaustion, sleep came slowly. Her mind kept replaying the day, the shock of finding Charles with Sarah, the terror of her blind flight, the moment Mason had grabbed her horse's bridle and changed everything. What was she doing? She was going to marry a man she had known for less than a day. It was insane, reckless, completely unlike her. But what choice did she have? The thought of returning to Hamilton, of everyone knowing she had run away from her own wedding, of her father losing everything because she could not be obedient and dutiful, was unbearable. At least with Mason, she had a chance at something different. Maybe not love, at least not right away, but honesty, respect, the possibility of building something real. She thought about the way he had looked at her, not with the calculating assessment Charles had always shown, but with genuine concern. The way he had caught her when her knees buckled. The way he had offered her not a rescue but a partnership. Maybe it would be all right. Maybe this strange twist of fate would lead somewhere good. In the barn, Mason was having similar thoughts. He had acted on pure instinct when he offered to marry Jessica, but now, lying in the hay with his saddle for a pillow, he wondered if he had lost his mind. He knew nothing about her, really. She could be difficult or lazy or cruel, but somehow he did not think so. Even in her distress, there had been something about her that called to him. Strength beneath the tears, pride in the way she had tried to compose herself. And those eyes, storm gray and deep, full of intelligence and feeling. He had been lonely for a long time, he realized. The ranch kept his hands busy but did little for his heart. He had thought about finding a wife before, but the women in Hamilton had never interested him much. They were nice enough, but there had never been that spark, that sense of connection. With Jessica, even in their brief acquaintance, he felt something different. Maybe it was just the circumstances, the drama of the moment. Or maybe it was something more. He supposed he would find out soon enough. They set out early the next morning, fortified by Martha's hearty breakfast. Martha packed them food for the journey and hugged Jessica tightly before they left. "You take care of yourself," she whispered in Jessica's ear, "and do not be a stranger. If you need anything at all, you come to us." "Thank you," Jessica managed, moved by the woman's kindness. The ride that day was longer, pushing toward Deer Lodge through increasingly mountainous terrain. They stopped occasionally to rest the horses and eat some of the food Martha had packed. As they rode, Mason and Jessica began to talk more, sharing pieces of their histories. Jessica told him about growing up on her father's farm, about her mother's slow decline from an illness the doctors could not quite name, about her two younger brothers who had gone east to work in the factories of Chicago. She spoke of her love for reading, for the few books she had been able to get her hands on, and her dream of someday having a library of her own. "I know it is silly," she said. "Books are expensive, and there is always something more practical to spend money on. But I always thought that someday, if I had the means, I would have a whole room just for books." "That is not silly," Mason said. "Everyone should have something they dream of. I cannot promise you a library right away, but maybe someday, if the ranch does well, we could work toward it." Jessica felt a warmth in her chest at his words. He was not dismissing her dreams as frivolous, the way Charles always had. Mason told her about his own history, how he had come west from Missouri after his parents died of fever when he was 19. He had worked as a ranch hand for a few years, learning the cattle business, before saving enough to buy his own land. He spoke of his love for the Montana Territory, for the big sky and the mountains, and the sense of possibility that seemed to hang in the very air. "There is room to breathe here," he said. "Room to build something that is yours. Back in Missouri, everything felt cramped and decided. Here, you can make your own way." "You ever miss Missouri?" Jessica asked. "Sometimes," Mason admitted. "I miss my parents, of course, but the place itself." "No, this is home now." They spent their second night at a small inn on the outskirts of Deer Lodge. Mason paid for 2 separate rooms, wanting to maintain propriety until they were properly married. Jessica appreciated the gesture, the respect it showed. The next morning, they found the circuit preacher, a weathered man named Reverend Samuel Potter, staying at the local church. Mason explained their situation, leaving out the more dramatic details but making it clear they wanted to marry as soon as possible. Reverend Potter looked between them with sharp eyes. "You two seem mighty eager. You have not known each other long, I take it." "No, sir," Mason said honestly, "but we are sure about this." "Miss Harper," the Reverend addressed Jessica directly, "is this what you want? You are not being forced." Jessica met his gaze steadily. "I am not being forced. This is my choice." The Reverend studied them a moment longer, then nodded. "All right, then. Love comes in all manner of ways and times. Who am I to say this is not one of them? We will do the ceremony this afternoon. That will give you time to get yourselves ready and find some witnesses." The actual wedding was a simple affair, held in the small church with 2 miners Mason recruited from a nearby saloon serving as witnesses. Jessica wore the same dusty, torn dress she had fled Hamilton in, though she had done her best to clean it and pin up her hair properly. Mason had bought a new shirt from the general store and looked uncomfortable in it, tugging at the collar. Reverend Potter kept the ceremony brief and to the point. "Do you, Mason O'Brien, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Mason said, his voice firm. "Do you, Jessica Harper, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Jessica took a breath, then said, "I do. By the power vested in me by the territory of Montana and the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Mason looked at Jessica, a question in his eyes. She nodded slightly. He leaned in and kissed her gently, briefly, a kiss that was more promise than passion. When they pulled apart, Jessica found her heart racing. They were married. She was Jessica O'Brien now, wife to a man she had known for 3 days. After the ceremony, Mason insisted they stay in Deer Lodge for one more night. "A wedding night," he said, then quickly added, "but I meant what I said before. We take things at whatever pace you are comfortable with." He got them a nicer room at the inn, one with a real bed and a wash basin, and even a small bouquet of wildflowers that the innkeeper's wife provided when she heard they were newlyweds. That night, after a simple but nice dinner, they sat together on the edge of the bed, the awkwardness of the situation settling around them. "I suppose this is strange," Jessica said. "Very strange," Mason agreed, "but we will figure it out." He kept his word about taking things slow. They lay down together on top of the covers, both fully dressed. Mason blew out the lamp, and in the darkness, they talked quietly about their plans for the next day, for returning to the ranch, for how they would handle telling her parents what had happened. Somewhere in the middle of the conversation, exhaustion claimed them both, and they fell asleep side by side, inches apart but not touching. The next morning, they began the journey back toward Hamilton. They had been gone 4 days now, and Jessica knew her parents would be frantic. The thought of facing them filled her with dread, but Mason had drafted a letter while they were in Deer Lodge, explaining that Jessica was safe and married, and that her father's debts would be paid. They posted it before leaving town, hoping it would arrive before they did to soften the shock. As they rode, Jessica found herself relaxing more around Mason. He had a quiet, steady presence that was reassuring. He did not press her with questions or demands. He just rode beside her, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife, content with silence or conversation as it came. They made good time, and by late afternoon of the second day, they could see the mountains that rimmed the valley where Hamilton sat. Instead of heading directly to town, Mason guided them toward his ranch. "I thought you might want to see your new home before we deal with everything else," he explained. They rode up a gentle rise, and there it was, the O'Brien Ranch. It was modest, as Mason had said, but well-maintained. The cabin was solid, built of logs with a stone chimney. The barn was sturdy, and Jessica could see chickens scratching around in their coop. Beyond the buildings, cattle grazed in the distance, moving slowly across the grassland. The mountains provided a stunning backdrop, their peaks still tipped with snow despite the summer heat. "It is beautiful," Jessica said, and meant it. Mason looked pleased. "Come on, I will show you around." He helped her down from her horse and led her first to the cabin. Inside, it was sparse but clean. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a wood stove, a table with 2 chairs, and a comfortable-looking armchair near the fireplace. A doorway led to a bedroom, small but with a decent bed and a wardrobe. A ladder led to the loft above. "I thought you could have the bedroom," Mason said. "I will sleep in the loft. Eventually, maybe we could add another room, but for now, this is what we have." "You do not have to give up your room," Jessica protested. "I want to," Mason said firmly. "You need some space that is yours. We will share everything else, but I want you to have that." Jessica felt a rush of gratitude. He was being so considerate, so careful with her. "Thank you." They spent the rest of the afternoon with Mason showing her around the property. He introduced her to the chickens, showed her the springs that provided their water, took her out to see some of the cattle. Jessica found herself genuinely interested in all of it. This was going to be her life now, her home. She wanted to know every detail. As the sun set, they returned to the cabin. Mason started a fire in the stove and began pulling out ingredients for dinner. Jessica, watching his awkward attempts at cooking, finally laughed and took over. "Let me," she said. "You will burn everything." "I told you I was not much of a cook," Mason said, but he was grinning. Jessica made a simple but hearty stew from the supplies she found in the pantry. They ate together at the small table, and for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Jessica felt something like peace. "Tomorrow we should go see your parents," Mason said. "Get that over with." "Yes," Jessica agreed, though her stomach clenched at the thought. "They will be so angry." "Let them be angry at me," Mason said. "You did what you needed to do to survive. Any parent worth their salt will understand that eventually." That night, Jessica settled into the bedroom while Mason climbed to the loft. She lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the lowing of distant cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. She thought about everything that had changed in just a few days. She was married now to a good man who had shown her nothing but kindness. She had a home. She was safe. For the first time in months, maybe years, she felt a tiny spark of hope. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Jessica dressed carefully in the cleanest dress she had, trying to look presentable for her parents. Mason hitched up his wagon, thinking the more formal transportation might help with the impression they made. The ride to the Harper farm took about 30 minutes. With every passing moment, Jessica grew more tense. Mason reached over and squeezed her hand briefly. "Whatever happens, we face it together," he said. The Harper farm came into view, smaller than Mason's ranch but neat and well-ordered. The house was a simple frame structure, painted white but showing signs of wear. A vegetable garden stretched to one side and a few pigs rooted in a pen near the barn. Before they even reached the house, the door flew open and a man came rushing out. He was in his 50s, thin and careworn with gray streaking his brown hair. Jessica's father, Robert Harper. "Jessica," he shouted, his face a mixture of relief and fury. "Where have you been? Do you have any idea what you have put us through?" Jessica climbed down from the wagon, Mason right behind her. "Papa, I am sorry, but I can explain." "Explain." Robert's face was red. "You ran away from your own wedding. Charles Wickham is threatening to call in all my debts immediately. We are ruined, Jessica. Your selfishness has ruined us." "That is enough," Mason said, his voice quiet but firm. He stepped slightly in front of Jessica. "Your daughter ran away because Charles Wickham struck her and because she discovered him with another woman on the morning of their wedding. She did nothing wrong." Robert stared at Mason as if seeing him for the first time. "Who are you?" "Mason O'Brien, Jessica's husband." The silence that followed was profound. Robert's mouth opened and closed. From the house, a woman appeared, thin and pale, leaning heavily on a cane. Jessica's mother, Caroline Harper. "Jessica," Caroline called weakly. "Is that you, Mama?" Jessica rushed past her father to her mother's side, helping support her. "You are married," Robert finally managed. "To whom, when?" "To me," Mason said. 4 days ago in Deer Lodge. And as for your debts to Charles Wickham, I will be paying them off, today if possible." Robert looked stunned. "You will what?" "Pay them off," Mason repeated. "Jessica told me about the situation. Wickham was using those debts to force a marriage to a woman less than half his age. That ends now." "But why would you do this?" Robert demanded. "What do you want?" "I do not want anything except for Jessica to be safe and for your family to be free of Wickham's control," Mason said. "Jessica is my wife now. That makes your family my family. I take care of my own." Caroline began to cry softly. Jessica held her mother, her own tears falling. "I am sorry, Mama. I know I should have told you, but there was no time and I could not marry Charles. I just could not." "Shh, baby," Caroline murmured. "I am just glad you are safe. When you did not come back, when they found your horse's tracks heading east, I thought the worst." "Come inside," Robert said, his anger deflating into confusion and exhaustion. "We need to talk about this properly." They all went into the house, a small but tidy space that smelled of lavender and old wood. Caroline settled into a rocking chair, still holding Jessica's hand. Robert paced, trying to process everything. Mason stood near the door, giving the family space. "Tell me everything," Robert finally said, sitting heavily at the kitchen table. Jessica did, starting with finding Charles with Sarah and ending with the ceremony in Deer Lodge. She left nothing out, and with every word, Robert's face grew more troubled. When she finished, he turned to Mason. "You are serious about paying the debts?" "Completely serious," Mason said. "How much does he hold?" $3,200, Robert said quietly. "I borrowed it over the years for equipment, seed, medicine for Caroline. The interest kept growing. I could never quite get ahead of it." Mason nodded. "I have $3,500 in the bank in Hamilton, enough to clear the debt and then some. We will go see Wickham today and settle it." "Why would you do this for us?" Robert asked again. "You do not know us." "Because it is the right thing to do," Mason said simply. "And because no man should be able to use money to control another man's life, or to force a woman into marriage against her will." Robert looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and seemed to see for the first time the bruise on her cheek, the fear and pain in her eyes. His own eyes filled with tears. "Jessica, I am sorry," he said hoarsely. "I thought I was protecting you, securing your future. I did not know what kind of man he really was." "I know, Papa," Jessica said softly. "But running off and marrying a stranger," Robert shook his head, "that was reckless." "Perhaps," Jessica agreed, "but Mason has been nothing but kind and respectful to me. He has given me a choice, a chance at a real life. That is more than Charles ever offered." Caroline spoke up, her voice weak but determined. "Robert, look at her. Really look. She was terrified of marrying Charles. I saw it, even if you did not want to. And now, yes, she has married quickly, but look at her face now. She is not afraid anymore." Robert turned his gaze to Mason, studying him with a father's critical eye. "You will treat her well, provide for her." "I will do my best, sir," Mason said. "I cannot promise riches or an easy life, but I can promise respect and partnership and honesty, and I can promise that no one will ever raise a hand to her again." The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Robert nodded slowly. "All right. All right. What is done, but we do need to settle things with Wickham, and that will not be pleasant." "Then let us go do it now," Mason said. "No sense in waiting." The three of them rode into Hamilton together, Robert, Mason, and Jessica. Caroline was too weak to make the trip. The town was quiet in the mid-morning heat, but as they rode down Main Street, Jessica could feel eyes watching them. Word would already be spreading. The runaway bride had returned, and she had a husband with her. Charles Wickham's Mercantile was the largest building on Main Street, a two-story structure that also housed his office. Mason tied up the horses and held out his hand to help Jessica down. She took it, drawing strength from his steady presence. They found Charles in his office, a well-appointed room with dark wood furniture and thick carpets. He looked up as they entered, and his face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, calculation. "Jessica," he said, standing, "you have returned. I am glad. We can reschedule the ceremony for next week once this unpleasantness has blown over." "There will not be a ceremony," Jessica said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Not next week or ever. I am already married." Charles's gaze snapped to Mason. "And who are you?" "Mason O'Brien, Jessica's husband, and the man who is here to pay off Robert Harper's debts." Charles's eyes narrowed. "Is that so? And where would a small-time rancher get that kind of money?" "That is my business," Mason said. "What is yours is accepting payment and releasing the debt notes." "I do not think I want to do that," Charles said slowly. "Those notes are legal contracts. I have every right to hold them." "And I have every right to pay them off," Mason countered. "That is how debt works, Wickham. Or are you going to refuse payment?" "That would be interesting to explain to the town council." Charles's jaw tightened. He looked at Jessica with undisguised malice. "You stupid girl, do you have any idea what you have thrown away? I would have made you a lady, given you a fine house, fine clothes, status in this town." "You would have made me miserable," Jessica said quietly. "And you would have made no effort to hide your contempt for me or your affairs with other women. My private life is my own business." "Not when it involves my cousin on the morning you were supposed to marry me," Jessica shot back. "How many people have you told that story to, Charles? How many people are laughing about the naive girl who did not know what she was walking into?" Charles's face flushed. "You have no proof of anything." "I have my word," Jessica said. "And I am willing to share my story with anyone who will listen, including the town council, including your business partners. I wonder how your reputation would fare if it became known that you hit me when I confronted you." The threat hung in the air. Charles looked at her with new respect and new hatred. "You have changed." "Yes," Jessica agreed. I have. Mason stepped forward, placing a bank draft on Charles's desk. $3,200. The full amount of the Harper debts, including interest. I want the notes, signed over as paid in full right now. Charles stared at the draft for a long moment. Finally, he reached into his desk and pulled out a folder. He counted out several pieces of paper, notes documenting Robert's various loans. He signed each one as paid, his pen scratching viciously across the paper. "There," he said, shoving the papers across the desk. "The debts are cleared. Now get out of my store." Mason gathered the papers, checking each one carefully before handing them to Robert. Then he turned back to Charles. "One more thing. If you ever bother Jessica or her family again in any way, you will answer to me. That includes spreading lies about her or trying to damage her father's business or anything else your twisted mind might come up with. Am I clear? Are you threatening me?" Charles demanded. "I am making a promise," Mason said. "Stay away from my wife and her family." They left the mercantile, stepping back into the bright sunshine. Robert was staring at the paid notes in his hands as if he could not quite believe they were real. "You did not have to do this," he said to Mason. "This is a fortune." "It is done," Mason said. "Now your family can move forward without that weight on them." "I will pay you back," Robert said. "I do not know how or when, but I will find a way." "Put it toward your wife's care instead," Mason said. "Get her the medicine she needs." "That is payment enough." Robert's eyes were wet. He grasped Mason's hand and shook it hard. "You are a good man, Mason O'Brien. Thank you. Thank you." As they walked back to the horses, Jessica noticed people watching from windows and doorways. She held her head high, refusing to show shame or embarrassment. Let them talk. She knew the truth. She had escaped a terrible marriage and found something better, something real. Mason helped her onto the wagon, and as they prepared to leave town, a woman approached. Jessica recognized her immediately. Sarah, her cousin, looking nervous and guilty. "Jessica," Sarah said quietly, "can I talk to you?" "I do not think we have anything to say to each other," Jessica replied coldly. "Please, I need to apologize." Jessica exchanged a glance with Mason, who nodded slightly. She climbed down from the wagon. "You have 2 minutes." Sarah twisted her hands together. "I am sorry. What I did was wrong, and I knew it was wrong, but Charles, he said such pretty things, and I thought maybe he really cared for me." She laughed bitterly. "I was even more naive than you. The moment you ran, he dropped me completely, told me I was nothing to him, that it had all been a way to pass time until the wedding." Despite her anger, Jessica felt a flicker of pity. "You should have told me, Sarah, before the wedding." "I would have believed you." "I know," Sarah whispered. "I was a coward. I am sorry." Jessica looked at her cousin, this woman she had grown up with, played with as a child. The betrayal still stung, but she could see that Sarah was genuinely remorseful. And holding on to anger would only poison her own heart. "I forgive you," Jessica said finally. "But we cannot be close anymore, Sarah. You understand that?" "I understand," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. Thank you for forgiving me." Jessica returned to the wagon, and they rode out of Hamilton. She did not look back. The weeks that followed were a period of adjustment for both of them. Jessica threw herself into making the cabin a home, cleaning and organizing and planting a small garden near the house. She took over all the cooking and started making plans for preserving food for the winter. She cared for the chickens and learned to milk the cow Mason had recently acquired. Mason, for his part, worked the ranch with renewed energy. Having Jessica there made everything feel more purposeful. He was not just building something for himself anymore, but for both of them, for their future together. They developed a rhythm, a partnership. They worked together during the day, ate meals together, talked in the evenings about their plans and dreams. Mason was teaching Jessica about cattle ranching, and she was teaching him about maintaining a proper garden. But at night, they still slept separately, Mason in the loft and Jessica in the bedroom. Neither of them spoke about it, but the unspoken tension was there, growing slowly like a seed in dark soil. Jessica found herself watching Mason more and more. The way he moved, confident and capable. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened. The way he smiled, rare but genuine. He was handsome, she realized, in a way she had not fully appreciated at first. And he was kind. So impossibly kind. Mason was having similar thoughts about Jessica. Her courage amazed him. She had been through something traumatic, had her life turned completely upside down, and yet she had adapted with grace and determination. She made the cabin feel warm and alive. Her laughter, when it came, lit up his whole world. And she was beautiful, more beautiful than he had even realized that first day when he had found her crying. One evening, about 6 weeks after their wedding, they were sitting outside watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. Jessica had brought out coffee and they sat side by side in the 2 chairs Mason had built and placed on the porch. "I have been thinking," Jessica said quietly, "about us." Mason's heart rate picked up. "What about us?" "This has been good," Jessica said. "Better than good. You have been so patient with me, giving me space and time. But Mason, I do not need as much space anymore." He turned to look at her. "What are you saying?" Jessica met his eyes, her own filled with something that made his breath catch. "I am saying that I think we could be more than just partners. If you want that. I know this started as an arrangement, a practical solution, but it has become more than that for me. I care about you, Mason, more than I expected to." "Jessica," Mason said, setting down his coffee cup. "I've cared about you since the moment I turned your horse around. Maybe I did not know it then, but I feel it now. I think about you all the time. I watch you working in the garden and I think about how lucky I am. You are amazing." "Then why do we keep pretending?" Jessica asked. "Why do we keep sleeping separately and acting like this is still just a business arrangement?" "Because I did not want to rush you," Mason said. "I did not want you to feel obligated or pressured." "You could never pressure me," Jessica said softly. "You are too good for that." "But Mason, I want more. I want to be your wife in every sense. I want to build a real marriage with you, a real life." Mason reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Are you sure?" "I am sure," Jessica said. "Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Mason leaned in and kissed her. This kiss was different from the brief, chaste kiss at their wedding. This was deep and searching and full of all the feelings they had been holding back. Jessica responded eagerly, her free hand coming up to cup his face. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "I guess that answers that," Jessica said with a slightly shaky laugh. Mason stood, pulling her up with him. "Come on." "Where are we going?" "Inside," Mason said. "If we are going to do this, we are going to do it right." That night, they came together as husband and wife in truth, not just in name. It was tender and passionate and a little awkward, as first times often are, but it was real. Afterward, lying in each other's arms in the bed they would now share, both felt a profound sense of rightness. "No more separate rooms," Mason murmured against her hair. "No more separate rooms," Jessica agreed, pressing closer to him. From that night forward, their marriage deepened and strengthened. They were not just partners anymore, but true companions, lovers, best friends. They laughed together and worked together and dreamed together. The ranch prospered. Mason expanded the herd, and Jessica's garden produced abundantly. They weathered the first winter together, cozy in their cabin, talking late into the night or sitting in comfortable silence while Mason whittled and Jessica read from the growing collection of books they were slowly accumulating. Jessica visited her mother regularly, and with the money they had saved by not paying Charles Wickham, Robert was able to afford better care. Caroline's health improved somewhat, and she was able to see her daughter happy, which seemed to give her strength. The people of Hamilton slowly accepted the scandal and moved on to newer gossip. Jessica faced down the stairs and whispers with her head high, Mason always at her side. Charles Wickham left them alone, perhaps having learned that they were not people to be trifled with. Spring came again, and with it, news that made Jessica both terrified and elated. She was expecting a child. Mason was overjoyed, immediately becoming even more protective than usual. He fussed over her constantly until she had to laugh and remind him that women had been having babies since the dawn of time. "Not my wife carrying my child," Mason said stubbornly. "That has never happened before, and I am allowed to worry." Their son was born in early winter, during the first snowfall. The labor was long and difficult, with Martha Johnson serving as midwife since the town doctor was snowed in and could not make it out to the ranch. But finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, their baby boy entered the world with a lusty cry that announced his arrival to anyone within a mile. Mason held his son with trembling hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered. "Jessica, he is perfect." They named him Samuel Robert O'Brien, after the preacher who had married them and Jessica's father. He was a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both exhausted and delighted in equal measure. Caroline held on long enough to meet her grandson, and the joy in her face as she cradled the baby was something Jessica would treasure forever. She passed peacefully in her sleep 2 weeks after Samuel's birth, with Robert and Jessica at her side. The grief was sharp but not bitter. Caroline had held on to see her daughter happy and to meet her grandchild. It was as much as anyone could ask for. Robert sold the farm after Caroline's death, finding it too lonely to stay there without her. He moved into a small house in town, close enough to visit his daughter and grandson regularly, but with his own space. He and Mason had become genuine friends, and Robert pitched in at the ranch whenever he was needed. The years passed, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. When Samuel was 3, Jessica gave birth to a daughter they named Caroline Martha, after Jessica's mother and the woman who had been so kind to them. 2 years later, another son arrived, Thomas Michael. The ranch continued to grow. Mason took on steady hands, including the Thomas he had mentioned that first day, who became not just an employee but a trusted friend. They built a larger house, with a real parlor and multiple bedrooms, and even a room that Mason insisted be set aside for Jessica's books. "Your library," he said, presenting it to her on their 10th wedding anniversary. "It is not much yet, but we will fill it together." Jessica cried happy tears and kissed him thoroughly. "It is everything." Samuel grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the cattle. He followed his father everywhere, learning the business from the ground up. Caroline was wild and free, fearless in her explorations of the land around them. Thomas was the gentle one, always bringing Jessica flowers he had picked or interesting rocks he had found. On warm summer evenings, the family would sit on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over the mountains. Jessica would sometimes think back to that day, 11 years ago now, when she had been riding away from Hamilton in tears, her whole world shattered. She thought about the cowboy who had grabbed her horse's bridle and refused to let her throw her life away. The man who had offered her not a rescue but a partnership. The stranger who had become her husband, her lover, her best friend. "What are you thinking about?" Mason asked one such evening, noticing her reflective expression. "About the day we met," Jessica said. "About how you turned my horse around." "Best decision I ever made," Mason said, reaching for her hand. "Best decision we both made," Jessica corrected. She looked at their children playing in the yard, at the thriving ranch stretching around them, at the man beside her who had shown her what real love looked like. I thought my life was ending that day, but really it was just beginning. Our life, Mason said. Together. Together, Jessica agreed, squeezing his hand. As the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, they sat in comfortable silence, surrounded by the life they had built. It had not always been easy, and there had been hard times along with the good, but they had faced everything together, and they always would, for as long as they both drew breath. The years continued to roll by in the way they do in a life well lived, with seasons of plenty and seasons of hardship, but always with the constant of their love anchoring everything. By their 20th anniversary, the O'Brien Ranch had become one of the most respected operations in the territory. Montana had achieved statehood in 1889, and with it came new opportunities and new challenges. Samuel, now 19, had grown into a fine young man, capable and confident in running the ranch. He had his father's steady nature and his mother's sharp mind. He had started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited girl named Elizabeth Thornton, and Mason and Jessica watched the young romance with knowing smiles, remembering their own unconventional beginning. Caroline, at 16, was indeed as wild and free as they had expected. She could rope and ride as well as any ranch hand, and had declared her intention to never leave Montana. She wanted to learn veterinary medicine, an unusual ambition for a woman, but one her parents supported wholeheartedly. Mason had been making inquiries about apprenticeships with the few veterinarians in the region. Thomas, at 14, remained the gentle soul he had always been. He loved the ranch, but in a different way than Samuel. He was fascinated by the land itself, by the plants and the weather patterns and the way everything connected. He kept detailed journals of his observations and had started corresponding with a professor at the Territorial University about agricultural science. Jessica's library had indeed been filled over the years, shelf by shelf, book by book. It had become her sanctuary, the place she retreated to when she needed to think or to simply breathe. Mason had even commissioned a special comfortable chair for her, placed near the window where the light was best. One autumn day, as the leaves were turning gold and the air had that crisp edge that promised winter, Jessica was working in her garden when she heard a rider approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and was surprised to see Sarah riding up the path. Jessica had not seen her cousin in years. After their brief conversation in Hamilton all those years ago, Sarah had married a clerk from Deer Lodge and moved away. They had exchanged a few letters over the years, brief and cordial but not particularly warm. "Sarah," Jessica said, wiping her hands on her apron, "this is a surprise." Sarah dismounted, and Jessica could see the years had not been particularly kind to her. She looked older than her 40-some years, with lines of worry etched around her eyes and mouth. "Jessica, I am sorry to arrive unannounced," Sarah said, "but I needed to see you, to talk to you." "Come inside," Jessica said, her natural hospitality overriding her wariness. "I will make coffee." They settled in the kitchen, and Jessica poured coffee while waiting for Sarah to speak. Finally, her cousin said, "My husband died 3 months ago. Consumption. I have been sorting through his affairs, and I find myself with very little. The debts were more than I knew. I am going to have to leave the house in Deer Lodge." "I am sorry for your loss," Jessica said sincerely. "That must be very difficult." "I was wondering," Sarah said, not meeting Jessica's eyes, "if you might know of any work in the area. I have experience in housekeeping and cooking. I could take in sewing. I just need to earn enough to rent a room and feed myself." Jessica studied her cousin, this woman who had betrayed her so long ago but who now sat before her, humbled by circumstance. She thought about the girl she had been, so frightened and lost. She thought about the grace that had been shown to her by Martha Johnson and by Mason himself. "Sarah, look at me," Jessica said gently. When her cousin raised her eyes, Jessica continued, "You hurt me badly all those years ago. You betrayed my trust when I needed family most." "I know," Sarah whispered. "I have regretted it every day since." "But," Jessica continued, "I also know something about starting over and being given a second chance when you do not deserve it. The bunkhouse has an extra room. It is small but private. If you are willing to work, and I mean really work, I could use help in the house and with the children. We can pay you a fair wage plus room and board." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that for me, after everything?" "I am doing it because someone once did something similar for me when I was desperate," Jessica said. "I am paying forward the grace I was given. But Sarah, if you betray this family again in any way, you will be gone immediately. Do you understand?" "I understand," Sarah said, nodding vigorously. "Thank you, Jessica. Thank you so much." Sarah proved to be a good worker, diligent and grateful for the opportunity. She was wonderful with the younger children, and Caroline, who had heard the story of her mother's interrupted first wedding, watched Sarah with wary interest before gradually warming to her. That winter was harsh, with heavy snows that isolated the ranch for weeks at a time. But the O'Briens weathered it well, as they always did. The house was warm, the food stores were ample, and the family was together. On Christmas Eve, with all the children and Sarah and Thomas, the ranch hand, and Robert gathered around the tree Mason had cut from the mountainside, Jessica felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She caught Mason's eye across the room, and he smiled at her, that special smile that was just for her. Later, after everyone had gone to bed and they were alone in their room, Mason pulled Jessica close. "Happy?" he asked. "Impossibly happy," Jessica said. "Sometimes I still cannot believe this is my life, that you are my husband, that these are our children, that this is our home." "Believe it," Mason said, kissing her forehead, "because it is real and it is ours, and I fall more in love with you every single day." "Even though I am getting gray hair," Jessica teased. "Especially because of the gray hair," Mason said. "Every gray hair is a year we have lived together, a challenge we have faced, a joy we have shared. I would not trade a single one." Jessica kissed him deeply, pouring 2 decades of love and trust and partnership into it. When they finally pulled apart, she said, "Thank you for turning my horse around that day." "Thank you for letting me," Mason replied. "More years passed, bringing more changes." Samuel married Elizabeth Thornton in a beautiful ceremony that had both mothers crying and both fathers pretending they were not. The young couple built a house on the northern section of the O'Brien Ranch and began their own family. Within 3 years, Jessica and Mason were grandparents to 2 lively little boys who filled the main house with noise and energy whenever they visited. Caroline did indeed pursue veterinary medicine, apprenticing with a veterinarian in Helena. She was one of the first women in Montana to do so, and she faced considerable skepticism and opposition. But she persevered, supported always by her family, and eventually opened her own practice serving the ranches around Hamilton. She never married, declaring herself married to her work, and seemed perfectly content with that choice. Thomas went to university, studying agriculture and land management. He returned to Montana with new ideas about sustainable ranching and crop rotation that he implemented on the family ranch. He married a schoolteacher from Hamilton, a quiet, bookish woman named Abigail, and they had one daughter who was the apple of everyone's eye. Sarah remained with the family, becoming almost a beloved aunt to the children. She never remarried, but she seemed content with her place in the O'Brien household. She and Jessica had, over the years, rebuilt something like their old relationship, though it was seasoned now with the wisdom that comes from both betrayal and forgiveness. Robert lived to see all his grandchildren and 2 great-grandchildren before he passed peacefully in his sleep at 78. At his funeral, Jessica stood between Mason and her father's coffin and thought about how far they had all come, how much they had all survived and built together. As Jessica herself moved into her 50s, she sometimes dealt with aches and pains that had not troubled her in youth, but she remained strong and active. She still tended her garden, still managed the household, still read voraciously in her beloved library. Mason, now in his mid-50s, had a few more gray hairs and a few more wrinkles, but he was still the strong, capable man who had turned her horse around all those years ago. He still rose before dawn to check the cattle. He still made her laugh. He still held her every night as they fell asleep. One day in late spring, as they were celebrating their 30th wedding anniversary, Jessica and Mason took a ride out to the spot where they had first met. The land had not changed much. The prairie grass still waved in the wind. The mountains still stood eternal in the distance. They stood together, Mason's arm around Jessica's waist, looking out over the land they had worked and loved for 3 decades. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had not stopped me that day?" Jessica asked. "No," Mason said simply, "because you are here. You are my wife. We have built this life together. There is no other path for me to wonder about. This is the right path, the only path." Jessica leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the absolute security of his presence. "I love you, Mason O'Brien. I loved you then, even when I did not know it yet. I love you now, and I will love you until the day I die." "And I love you, Jessica O'Brien," Mason said, turning her to face him. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, the very best thing." He kissed her then, there on the prairie where their story had begun, and it felt both like the first kiss they had ever shared and like the 1,000th, familiar and exciting all at once. They stayed there for a while longer, just the 2 of them, before riding back to the ranch where their family waited, where their life continued, rich and full and good. The years that followed were quieter but no less rich. Jessica and Mason settled into the comfortable rhythm of long marriage, that easy understanding that comes from decades of partnership. They knew each other's thoughts often before they were spoken, finished each other's sentences, moved around each other with practiced ease. The ranch was primarily run by Samuel now, with Thomas handling the agricultural side, and Mason serving as advisor and occasional helping hand when needed. It gave Mason more time to spend with Jessica, to take rides together in the early morning or sit on the porch in the evening watching the sun set. They traveled some, taking a trip to Denver that Jessica had always wanted to make, marveling at the city that had grown up in the years since the gold rush. They visited San Francisco, seeing the ocean for the first time together, standing hand in hand on the beach as waves crashed around their feet. But they always returned to Montana, to their ranch, to their family, because this was home in the truest sense of the word. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with the sound of children's laughter once again. Jessica loved being a grandmother, loved spoiling the little ones and then sending them home to their parents. Mason built a swing in the old oak tree near the house, and it was always occupied when the grandchildren visited. On their 40th anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children and grandchildren, Sarah, the ranch hands who had become like family, friends from Hamilton and the surrounding ranches. It was a beautiful day, warm and bright, and tables laden with food stretched across the yard. Jessica stood with Mason, watching the party, and felt her eyes fill with tears. "What is it?" Mason asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong," Jessica assured him. "I am just happy, so impossibly, wonderfully happy. Look at all of this, Mason. Look at what we built." Mason surveyed the scene, his own eyes growing misty. Their children, strong and successful and happy. Their grandchildren, healthy and full of life. The ranch, thriving and beautiful. The community of people who loved them and whom they loved in return. "We did good," he said simply. "We did very good," Jessica agreed. Samuel stood to make a toast, and the crowd quieted. "To my parents," he said, raising his glass. "Two people who showed all of us what real love looks like, what partnership looks like, what commitment and faith and courage look like. Everything I am, everything we all are, comes from their example. To Mom and Dad." "To Mom and Dad," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. Jessica and Mason kissed to enthusiastic applause and a few good-natured catcalls from the ranch hands. They laughed, embarrassed but pleased, and the party continued late into the night. As people finally began to leave or settle down to sleep in various spots around the house and barn, Jessica and Mason retreated to their room. They changed for bed, moving around each other with the ease of 40 years of shared space. "Mason," Jessica said as they lay down together, "I need to tell you something." He tensed slightly. "What is it?" "I want you to know that if I died tomorrow, I would die completely satisfied with my life," Jessica said. "These 40 years with you have been everything I could have hoped for and more. You saved me that day on the prairie. You gave me a life worth living. And I want you to know that I am grateful for every single day." "Jessica Harper O'Brien, you are not allowed to talk about dying," Mason said firmly, though his voice was rough with emotion. "We have at least 40 more years to go." "Maybe," Jessica said with a smile. "But even if we do not, even if we only have a few more years or months or days, I want you to know that I regret nothing. Absolutely nothing." "Neither do I," Mason said, pulling her close. "You are my heart, Jessica. You always have been." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had for 40 years, as they would for all the years remaining to them. In truth, they had many more good years together. They saw Samuel's youngest son go off to university. They saw Caroline expand her veterinary practice to include 3 other women she had trained. They saw Thomas's agricultural innovations adopted by ranches throughout the region. They celebrated their 50th anniversary with another large party, Jessica now 72 and Mason 75. They were both still active, still sharp, though they moved a little slower and tired a little easier. 50 years, Jessica marveled as they danced to music provided by Samuel's eldest son on the fiddle. "Half a century. Best 50 years of my life," Mason said. "Though I will confess, there were a few moments in there that tested us. The winter of '93 when we nearly lost the herd," Jessica remembered. "The year Thomas broke his leg falling from that tree. When Caroline announced she was going to be a veterinarian and half the town said it could not be done. When we thought we were going to lose Samuel to that fever. They had weathered all of it together, every crisis, every fear, every challenge. And they had celebrated all the joys together too, every birth, every success, every quiet moment of contentment. As Jessica moved into her late 70s, her health began to decline. Nothing dramatic, just the slow winding down that comes with age. Her joints ached more. She tired more easily. But her mind remained sharp, and her love for her family never wavered. Mason, now 80, was showing his age too. His hearing was not what it had been, and he walked with a slight limp from an old injury. But he still rose each morning with Jessica, still kissed her good morning, still told her he loved her every single day. One autumn afternoon, They sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the growing chill. The mountains were already dusted with snow, promising an early winter. "Do you remember this view when we first moved here?" Jessica asked. "How it took my breath away." "It still takes my breath away," Mason said. "Though these days, climbing the porch steps also takes my breath away, so perhaps that is not saying much." Jessica laughed, the sound turning into a cough. Mason rubbed her back gently until it passed. "I have been thinking," Jessica said when she had caught her breath. "About my funeral, Jessica." "No, listen," she said firmly. "We are both old, Mason. We need to talk about these things. I do not want a sad funeral. I want it to be a celebration. I want people to tell stories and laugh. I want them to remember the good times, the joy. Can you promise me that?" "I promise," Mason said quietly. "Though I am planning on you outliving me, so you will have to do the same for my funeral." "Deal," Jessica said, taking his hand. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable and complete. Then Jessica said, "Thank you, Mason, for everything, for turning my horse around that day, for giving me a choice when I had none, for loving me all these years." "Thank you for saying yes," Mason replied, "for taking a chance on a crazy idea, for building this life with me, for being my partner in everything." "Always partners," Jessica said. "Always," Mason agreed. Jessica passed away peacefully in her sleep 2 years later at the age of 79. She simply went to bed one night, kissed Mason goodnight, told him she loved him, and did not wake in the morning. The funeral was held at the ranch as she had wanted. It was a beautiful day, clear and bright, and people came from all over to pay their respects. The children and grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren were all there. Sarah was there, elderly herself now but still mobile. Friends from decades of life in Montana came to celebrate the woman who had been taken in by the community and had given so much back to it. True to Jessica's wishes, the funeral was more celebration than mourning. People told stories of her kindness, her strength, her humor. They talked about her legendary garden, her love of books, her fierce protection of her family. They laughed and cried and remembered. Mason stood at the end, looking out at all the people Jessica had touched, and said simply, "She was the love of my life, the very best part of my life, and I will carry her in my heart until the day I join her." True to his word, Mason lived only 6 more months after Jessica's death. He simply seemed to fade without her, growing quieter and more withdrawn despite his family's best efforts. He spent long hours sitting on the porch, staring out at the mountains, or in Jessica's library, surrounded by her books. One morning in early spring, Samuel found him in his chair on the porch, a blanket over his lap and a smile on his face. He had passed as peacefully as Jessica had, simply closed his eyes and let go. At Mason's funeral, Samuel told the story of how his parents had met, how his father had turned his mother's horse around and changed both their lives forever. It was a story the whole family knew, but it never got old. "They taught us what love looks like," Samuel said. "Real love. Not perfect or easy, but real and lasting and true. They built something together that will outlast them. This ranch, this family, this legacy of kindness and courage and commitment. We are all here because 47 years ago, a cowboy saw a woman in tears and decided to help. That one act of kindness rippled out into all of this." He gestured to the crowd, to the ranch, to everything around them. "We honor them best by living as they did, by helping those who need it, by building partnerships based on respect and trust, by choosing love every single day." Mason and Jessica were buried side by side on a small hill on the ranch, overlooking the valley and the mountains they had both loved. Their headstones were simple, bearing just their names and dates and the words "always partners." The ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's management, and eventually his children's management. The O'Brien name became synonymous with quality cattle and ethical business practices in Montana. Jessica's library was preserved, eventually becoming a small community library that anyone could use. Caroline's veterinary practice continued, training more women in the field. Thomas's agricultural innovations spread throughout the region, improving yields and sustainability. And every generation of O'Briens grew up hearing the story of how it all began. Of a woman fleeing a terrible marriage, riding blindly towards certain death. Of a cowboy who grabbed her horse's bridle and refused to let her go. Of a crazy decision made in a moment of desperation that turned into 50 years of love and partnership and family. They grew up knowing that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That courage is not the absence of fear, but action taken despite it. That one act of kindness can change everything. And they grew up understanding that real love is not about grand gestures or perfect moments. It is about showing up every day, choosing your partner over and over again, building something together brick by brick and year by year, until you have created something so strong and so beautiful that it outlasts even death itself. The story of Mason and Jessica O'Brien became legend in Montana, told and retold, embellished and celebrated. But at its heart, it remained simple and true. A cowboy saw a woman in tears and turned her horse around, and everything changed. Everything.